Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second Thiel Forum of this academic year. We have an especially exciting event for you today as we travel vicariously, not only to different cultures and ways of life, but also inside what is perhaps the most mysterious place of all, and that is our own minds. Our first presenter today is Dr. Shannon Deets, who is an assistant professor of psychology and who has been at Thiel for 2 years. Her focus today is on mindfulness, the quintessential argument for a science of subjectivity. Dr. Deets will argue the need for a science of subjectivity in the era of STEM. This lecture will explain the need for an alternative paradigm in research through utilizing examples and data from her previous research into mindfulness and consciousness and the resistance that such an approach often encounters. I am proud to introduce my colleague, Dr. Deets.
So, it is my very strong hope and goal that in the next 10 minutes I will convince you all to become social scientists. So, to start off, we have to talk a little bit about what is the predominant paradigm in research today. And largely, this is the STEM, the science, the technology, math, right, all of those paradigms. What basically breaks down to that is that it's a reductionist model. So the idea is that you take a complex phenomenon and you break it down into its very simplest physical parts, its very simple physical mechanisms, and that you'll ultimately then understand it. And this is a great way to do science. If you're studying things like neurons, or plants, or even animal systems, or even electrons. It has a methodology that goes along with it, and all of you have probably heard about this methodology since you've been in 4th grade, right? You observe the world, you form a hypothesis, you go out and test your hypothesis, and the key is that you remove yourself as the researcher from the science, and you remove anything that might be considered to be an extraneous variable, anything that's extra to your experiment. So when we have a situation such as this, what the reductionist model can tell us is the velocity that this man is traveling down the water slide, the force of the water on his body. It can even tell us what kinds of sharks are going to thrive in this environment. What it can't tell us is what is the experience of sliding down the slide like for that man. And so this is where things get really exciting. This is where we need another paradigm. No amount of reductionist methodology is going to allow us to understand that experience. And so the science of subjectivity is a paradigm where instead of removing the researcher, instead of removing the experience of the participants, you actually find truth in the subjective experience itself. You find the truth of the reality that you're looking for. So to give you an example of this, let's say we're studying depression, and we want to know if a particular treatment is effective. So we go through this treatment, and we ask people to tell us, how many times did you have suicidal thoughts in the week before you tried the treatment and the week after you tried the treatment? And maybe we find out that people say, well, 20%. They reduced. And maybe that seems like a good thing until you actually talk to the person. They say, but I'm not getting any better. My subjective experience, my reality, is that I feel depressed. And so that's the only reality that actually matters for this person. The reality of what the medication did or the treatment did doesn't make any difference. And so ultimately what happens when you start to look at the world in this way, when you start to think about the subjective reality as being the true reality, you start to come up with the big questions. And these are the most important questions that I personally think as scientists that we can study. So what is it like to be human? And then what is it like to be aware of our own existence? Every moment that we are existing, we have a subjective reality, and we reflect back on that. And we reflect back on that to understand who we are. So we need to have a science that will approach that. And so this is where I think mindfulness comes in. Essentially what happens is every single moment of your experience is in total your consciousness. And so your consciousness we have to have a way to study that. Often what we need is a different perspective. So if you take a look at this here, the reality of the gentleman on the island to the reality of the gentleman in the boat is very subjective. And so what we have to sometimes do is have a dichotomous perspective in order to understand those elements of consciousness that we want to understand. Altered consciousness allows us to do that. Altered consciousness is simply, by definition, not your ordinary day-to-day consciousness. So anything that changes from that gives you that perspective to look back, step back a little bit. And so mindfulness is actually a really powerful way to explore this, because with mindfulness, what we're actually doing, it's a metacognitive process. We're actually looking at our own thinking, looking at our own awareness. We have the subjective reality. And so this is why I particularly like to use mindfulness in order to understand a science of subjectivity. So with the particular mindfulness venue that I use, I like to do dancing mindfulness. So this is a modality that includes the body and the mind together in order to produce that change, in order to produce that mindful state. And people have been doing this for thousands of years. If you look back at some of the Greek texts, you'll actually see that they were often told, go to the temple and dance for healing. And so we've been doing this for a really long time. People still do this today. Oftentimes people do it for recreation. They're just having fun, right? And they're dancing in this way. Other times people do it kind of for self-care, much the way that people go to a yoga studio. There are locations you can go to do dancing mindfulness. So my goal was to study this phenomenon, to really understand this from the subjective point of view. So I had to travel to different places where this activity is occurring. And then I wanted to bring that into my realm of mental health. I wanted to say, how can I use this as a treatment? The Greeks have been using it, right, in their writings for thousands of years, saying this is healing. So how can we use that? Well, in my research, I found a couple of main points that I'm just going to brush on today. One thing is that we know that dancing mindfulness leads to subjective well-being. And since that's the whole purpose, this well-being, that's exactly what we want to know. Specifically, we found that people who had histories of trauma, when they engaged in dancing mindfulness, they weren't bothered by the trauma as much anymore. And that's huge. If you can get somebody to not be bothered by the trauma, they are, in essence, healing. They're not traumatized. Another way that I used it was I actually taught children some dancing mindfulness techniques, and these were children that were diagnosed with autism. And then after we danced, I would teach them a particular social skill. Maybe it was reading somebody's face. Maybe it was introducing yourself. And what we found is that the children who were in the group that actually engaged in the dancing mindfulness generalized those abilities to outside environments. Their parents said, you know what, they asked me today how my day was. My child has never asked me about my day in their entire life. My child finally has a friend. So one of the things that we saw in this research of this is that the subjective experience of dancing mindfulness is connection with other people. So one experience is healing, one experience is connection. Other components were things like self-worth and relaxation. So these are all beneficial that we can bring that into the realm of therapy. One really interesting finding was that there's personality changes. And so if you know anything about personality, we psychologists tend to think that it's pretty standard, right? You get it for a while and it moves a little, but not too much. This actually changed people's personalities. They became more open. They became more accepting of themselves and others. They became more willing to engage in social activities. So this is a profound experience. And then the last one that was useful for me to talk about today is, I said, the science of subjectivity. We have to be on the boat and the land to actually understand the whole picture. So by understanding dancing mindfulness, I actually better understand the process of consciousness, and specifically the process of phenomenal or subjective consciousness, what it is like to be conscious. And so we had a model from our research that we were actually able to walk through, and this is largely a cognitive model where individuals move through various stages as they go from day-to-day consciousness to that feeling of having mindfulness. So, my last part is areas of resistance, but I also like to call this opportunities for change. So the large model that's used in most of the world today is that reductionist scientific model. People have certain biases when you start talking about a science of subjectivity. One is this bias that the reductionist methodology is the only true science. The problem with that is those researchers are in a state of denial because they're doing research that's being processed through their own subjective state. So to say that I've done things to remove myself from this research is at best inaccurate. What subjective scientific methodologies do is they say, oh yeah, it's definitely there. Let's look at it. Let's analyze it. Let's pull it apart. Let's play with it. Let's be on the boat and the land at the same time. The other bias that you often hear is that people say, well, it can't possibly be valid. You're just getting the results that you want to get. But in fact, when you're trained in subjective methodologies, there are definite ways that you can triangulate data. There are definite ways that you can check back to see if that experience is accurate for everyone involved. And it's that multiple voices, multiple conversations that actually lead you to something that is more likely to be the truth that you're actually looking for. What is it like to be a human? So my goals are opportunities. I think that we should really educate researchers in subjective methodologies as well as the traditional research methodologies. And many people don't do that. Many people don't even hear about any of these until at best graduate school. So it's really important that we include this. And I'm doing this a little bit now in our Research with Human Participants class. We're teaching the students about subjective methodologies and how do you do this kind of science. And then the other thing you need is institutional support. Unfortunately, because of the bias that exists, it's sometimes hard for researchers to get financial support or even just support from their peers in understanding what the research is all about. Because everyone has been so trained into one paradigm. So what we need to do to make a change in this is we also need to start educating people into the value of subjective science, into the value of how this can be combined with a traditional scientific method and actually give us more of the answers we're looking for. Because at the end of the day, the only reality that really matters is yours. If you feel you're depressed, then that's what we need to deal with, not whether I think this medication is effective or not. And so hopefully I have convinced you all to become social scientists. Thank you. I forgot. Questions? Yes?
I was just wondering how connected with the philosophical school of phenomenology your brand of phenomenology is.
So it is that sometimes you can look at phenomenology and that's one kind of science of subjectivity area. But there's all sorts of other ones. I tend to do a combination of grounded theory and phenomenology. So for me, it's this idea that I want to understand the experience from the individual, but then with grounded theory, you include the actual participants as co-researchers, and so you build it from the ground up. And what that means is your research morphs and changes as you go through the process, which if you're thinking from the subjective paradigm, that's exciting. If you're thinking from the traditional paradigm, that's terrifying, right? This idea that your research is going to change, you can't possibly do that. So it's a little bit of a mixture. Yes?
What would you do from a therapeutic point of view from someone like me who can't or won't dance?
So this is the interesting thing. Dancing mindfulness doesn't have to actually involve dance. And that sounds funny at first, but all it really is it's a method to get in contact with your body. You can do that seated. You could do that swaying back and forth. You could do that crawling. You don't have to have any technique or any desire to dance. You can actually achieve this through your body just by connecting in through the senses.
Well, I do sway back and forth a lot.
You might already be doing it then. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
So, my subjective reality, if I write a grant and include subjective measures, is I am viewed by my peers as a quack scientist.
Yep.
I don't get funded, and I'm viewed as not understanding the proper way to be objective.
Right.
How would one subjectively look at protein concentrations, or how would one subjectively look at computational models of electrons, to use the example you did? I'm not seeing how that would apply to some of those types of studies.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all model. It's not that this is going to be the only type of science. I think there's room for both kind of paradigms. But I would be interested to find out how the research did in fact change if the researchers themselves started doing some reflective pieces on what their experience was when they're looking at the data. If they saw that maybe they are interpreting certain things a little differently here or a little differently there. And it's minuscule changes. But I would be interested to see how that affected it. Ultimately, looking at proteins may be simply using reductionist methodology. If it works, it's not broke, don't fix it. But we have to have room for both, because understanding a protein is never going to help us understand what it is to be a human being.
So how would you compare and contrast what we call qualitative methodology in social sciences with what you call subjective methodology?
So qualitative methodology is this idea that you're looking for themes, you're looking for processes. What subjective science does is it takes it one step further. Even within most qualitative methodologies, there's still a separation between the researcher and the participant. And in a science of subjectivity, it really is this idea that that experience only happens in that moment between the two. So you have to consider both of those.
Is it worth recording that moment, though? Is it worth sort of either filming it or checking out like biological things that happen with the person as they experience it, and then I don't know.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I want to take and see if I can get some EEG readings while people are actually engaging in this. And so that is more of the traditional science and recording that, right? And I think that's very useful, but no amount of EEG reading is ever going to really tell me what it felt like for that person. And so again, I could say, well, when people do this, their EEGs look like this, and then when they do this, they look like this. It's kind of back to the depression thing. Well, you have 20% less suicidal thoughts, but I still feel depressed. So we have to always keep going back to what is the question we really want to answer. And it's always that subjective perspective. Yes?
I regret that I missed the first part of your talk due to other obligations that were taking my time. But from what you said, is this what you say subjective methodology somewhat akin to what Zen Buddhists call the moment of enlightenment, when they all of a sudden feel that they somehow understand things they didn't do before?
Absolutely. It really is that idea of so the be here now, right? That mindset of what is important is what happens in the exact moment. And so this is more of an Eastern kind of philosophy. It's not as widely rejected in the East, because you do have those kinds of individuals that do it from a spiritual perspective, but also consider the world from just a different perspective. So it is similar in alignment with Zen Buddhism.
Thank you very much, Dr. Deets. You certainly provided us with a lot to think about and another way of being in the world. Thank you. Our second presenter is a senior student, Nathan Flory. Nate is an English major and a religion minor and a member of the Dietrich Honors Institute. His presentation today will survey his 2-month summer journey to the United Kingdom and will focus on his time at Oxford University, his excursions to the cities of Bath and London, and his trips to Ireland and Edinburgh, Scotland. This rare opportunity was made available to Nate through the Oxford Study Abroad program, a private foundation that places students at affiliated colleges of Oxford University. Founded more than 900 years ago, Oxford is the oldest English-speaking university in the world. Nate applied to and won this scholarship that enabled him to study at Oxford for 6 weeks and complete research for his DHI senior project, which he will present at the DHI Student Research Symposium on Saturday, December 3rd, to which you are all invited. Nate is the first Thiel student to win this scholarship and to study at Oxford. We're proud of him and his strong representation of Thiel to the British Isles. Please sit back and enjoy From Bangors and Mash to the Bodleian, the Oxford Experience. I am very proud to present Nate Flory.
Hello, everyone. So 2 months is kind of a lot to squeeze into 10 minutes, though I'm just going to briefly summarize kind of my geographical journey, what I got to see and do, and then go into a little more in-depth about the personal academic experience at Oxford. So my time abroad began on May 9th when I flew out with the Thiel Choir from Pittsburgh to Ireland. We had about 2 weeks there touring. If you want to know more about that, talk to me, Dr. Bray, any of the choir members. We have plenty of stories. But the choir flew out of Dublin on May 21st when our tour ended, and I had about 2.5 free days till I needed to be at Oxford. I caught a train and then a ferry across to Wales, where I spent a day in Cardiff and explored there before arriving in Oxford on May 24th. So we have a few maybe familiar Oxford sites here. Their Bridge of Sighs in the bottom left, their own seal featuring their Latin motto, Dominus Illuminate Meo, the Lord is my light, and also big landmark, my bedroom in the top right corner. A few other things, the Radcliffe camera is the top center picture, which is part of the Bodleian Library system, one of the most photogenic buildings probably. That photo is taken from the top of the bell tower of the University Church of St. Mary's, which was one of my favorite activities, to go up there and just kind of see the cityscape. And this picture in the bottom left is actually from the inside of that building. The Bodleian actually stores the majority of its books outside of Oxford in a warehouse about 40 kilometers away because they don't have space for them. So if you want a specific article or book, you have to go online, request it, sort of similar to our interlibrary loans, and within about 24 hours, they will ship it to you by train. I used that system, the New College Library, and I was also a big fan of the Blackwell's bookstore across the street. It was about a 5-story building full of every book you could want just about, and a lot of my personal expenses were used in their used book section. They had some great deals. I had some excellent visitors while I was there. My family kind of used my time at Oxford as an excuse to have our first international vacation. So they came over for about a week. We spent some time in Oxford, London, and about a day and a half in Edinburgh, Scotland. Compared to about the 12-hour journey from Pittsburgh to Oxford, the 2 hours from Pittsburgh to Thiel is not very much, so I'm just going to point them out. They're right here, along with my grandma from Virginia that came. And also, many of you know Robert Carpenter, who was able to swing by Oxford for a few days. He spent time with the Germany study tour, and then spent some time on his own in continental Europe before swinging by, and we spent more time exploring Oxford and London together. So, as Dr. Hall mentioned, I was a member of the Oxford Study Abroad program, which is an organization independent of the university, but works with several of the 38 colleges of Oxford University to help American students study there, whether it be for a term, an entire year, or just a summer session ranging anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks. Something I didn't know is that they had day-long excursions pre-planned for us, which was really exciting. A lot of times on Saturdays or Sundays or weekend day, we would go out for a day. So the top left is Bath. I got to see the Roman Bath, Jane Austen Museum, a few other things. Spent a day in London. Also went to Windsor, and we were traders and went to Cambridge for a day as well. And I was amazed by the similarities between the two schools, for as much as a rivalry as there is between them. And then the bottom left is a few pictures from Edinburgh, Scotland, when I was there with my family. And the last couple days after my time at Oxford, I had time to go to Stratford upon Avon, saw a ton of Shakespeare things, and I got to see the Royal Shakespeare Company do Dr. Faustus and A Midnight Summer's Dream. So that was really fantastic. After that, said goodbye to Oxford. Last day that I was there was in London at the British Summertime Festival in Hyde Park. That was maybe one of my most exciting days there. Got to see about 12 live bands, lots of live music, including London's own Mumford & Sons. Then I got to go back to my hostel, sleep for about 2 hours, woke up, caught a train from Paddington to Heathrow, and then flew back and arrived back in Pittsburgh on July 9th, exactly 2 months after I had departed. So more into what I actually did while at Oxford. The office on George Street, 27 George Street, is the OSAP office, the third floor of that building, which was fairly centrally located. It was about a 10-minute walk from the flat. They provided housing for me, so I had a flat that I shared with 3 others. Me and another guy had rooms to ourselves. 2 others shared a bedroom, and we split 2 bathrooms, a kitchen, and a small living room sort of space. It was a little cramped with 4 people, but definitely livable. And it was about 10 minutes from that office, 15 minutes from the Bodleian. It's rather well located, 5 minutes from the train station, so that was very nice. I was a member of New College, with a picture of one of the quads there, so I had full access to the library, dining facilities, any sort of resources there. But my mentor, who I was paired with, Dr. Andrew Thiel, spelled T-E-A-L, of no affiliation to the college that we know of, was a member of Pembroke College, pictured in the bottom right, so I actually spent a lot of my time there with him. So academically, I focused on studying religion and postmodernism, which is the topic of my senior DHI thesis. Each week I had to write anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 words on a particular facet of that subject. It was very heavily self-guided, though Dr. Thiel would help me kind of focus on particular areas to write on, or towards particular books or thinkers that might be relevant to what I want to work with. I came back here with about 14,000 words towards my thesis. As Dr. Hall said, I'll be presenting the academic work on that on December 3rd at the DHI Research Symposium, so I'm going to hold off on the academic subject matter until then, still putting the finishing touches on, but that was really great to get a head start on that in Oxford. It was a phenomenal experience. The Oxford Study Abroad program allows students to study literally anything. In the applications, there's just a blank spot, and you have to write what you want to study, which was like really difficult for me to wrap my mind around. I asked them several times. They have a list of suggested things to study, but you can literally fill that with whatever you want, and they'll make something work for you. Dr. Thiel was great to work with. He welcomed me into the Pembroke kind of community life, invited me to chapel services and post-chapel drinks and meals. And during our one-on-one tutorial sessions, we actually got to kind of discuss things that happened at chapel or were going on kind of in politics in relevance to my paper. I was there for Brexit, which was rather exciting because the ratio from pound to dollar went from about 150 pound to $1 to about $1 or a pound 33 to $1. So I bought a few more books with that. And otherwise, that's really it. I really encourage students, if you think that's something that you would be interested in, to look into it. The website is there. I love, I can talk for a lot longer than 10 minutes about this, but if you want more information, talk to me. Faculty, if you think you have students who would be interested in this or something that might be useful for them. I mean, going abroad is honestly always a great experience. You get to kind of just really, you literally just get different views of the world. It broadens your perspective. For my thesis, Andrew and I were able to talk about kind of the facets of religion in the UK, which were similar to in the United States, but it was nice to kind of have him confirm some of my own views. Like I said, otherwise, if you're interested, check out the website, talk to me. I love telling. I have a lot more stories I can tell. But if you have questions, please feel free to ask. That's all I have formally.
One question, Nate. Did you feel comfortable academically? Did you feel well prepared from Thiel?
Oh, for sure. Like I said, it was really just essay writing as an English major. That's really easy. Most of the time that I was there, I didn't have like a ton of things that I really needed to do other than those weekly meetings. So I had a lot of time to be able to just sit in a room with my books, a notebook, my laptop, take notes, type. I kind of wish I had single days now where I could just sit and focus on one thing all day just to finish my thesis. But yeah, it was a great experience for that, and I felt very comfortable with it.
So did you have interaction with other students in the program other than the outings and maybe?
I mean, it's really up to the person. I had a little bit of interaction with my flatmates. Most of the other students from the program were Americans. As I said, there was a group of about 8 from Mississippi State and 3 faculty members. There were several from Hillsdale. There were some like me who were the only student from their respective college. Though I interacted with them some, and also, as I mentioned, with Pembroke College, I got to go to a few like dinners with my mentor and some of the choir members from the chapel, and got to relate with them. Some of them were from Germany, most of them were from England. Really funny interacting, really similar atmosphere. One thing I like to compare is for the dinners, it was at the college dining hall, and they'll kind of talk about the food, and they'll just be like, don't expect much, it's just like Pembroke, or like just how we'll say, it's just Thiel food. Kind of similar views whether you're at Oxford or at Thiel. Dr. Morgan?
Were you able to assess the general sentiment regarding Brexit among the Oxford Dons?
Oxford and Cambridge were about the 2 places that had the highest percentages voting to remain. So there were no like open riots or anything that I saw, but I think people on the inside were fairly worried about what the result was going to be. For sure, I know Dr. Thiel and pretty much all the students that I spoke with said that they were Remainers. I know it was a very close vote, but they weren't necessarily happy with it. But so that's the general sense, I guess, for sure. Dr. Johnson.
Did you get to spend some time at the bottom, and did you get a car?
I do. I have a car.
Excellent.
Like I said, it's a completely different environment here than anywhere than it is. I think it was red, but it faded a little bit.
Okay.
Though I like to contrast it because it was just very serious, studious. You get that feel. But there's the Thiel Library, where our lovely librarian Alan Morrill is probably the loudest person in the library. Totally different atmosphere. Though yes, I got to explore that a lot. Like I said, I also like Blackwell's a lot too, the bookstore.
So you did find British food suitable for human consumption?
Oh, for sure, yeah. Personally, I liked it a lot. Yeah, like the last few meals I had there, I made sure to like get the traditional stuff, the fish and chips, bangers and mash, the chicken curry were phenomenal for my sense of taste at least. So I approve. All right, thank you.
Wonderful, Nate. Welcome back. We're so happy to have you, but we're also glad you had the experience, and we're delighted your family was able to be here today. It's great. Our final presenters today are 5 students from the biology department who accompanied Drs. Delbert Abi Abdallah and Fatimata Palé to Africa this summer. Each student will discuss one significant experience from that trip. I am proud to present Sarah Matzak, Paige Onomastico, Alexis Morris, Bev Kozak, and Brooke Gates, and perhaps introductory remarks by their professors, or they may just delve right into that. Okay, students, you are on. Thank you.
Alright, so as Dr. Hall said, we are going to enlighten you guys on our trip to South Africa. We could probably talk about this for hours, but we will try and keep it under time constraint.
So one of the first things we got to do while we were there was go to the Apartheid Museum and then a few days later explore Robben Island. So this exposed us to the basically political and societal history of South Africa. So this top picture up here is the entrance to the Apartheid Museum. The group photo outside of it, and this is the entrance to the museum. Inside we weren't allowed to take a lot of pictures, but it was a typical museum that depicted pictures with descriptions and videos. So the apartheid was a time in South Africa's history that was all segregation. Whenever the Europeans settled in South Africa, they kind of already were pushing the blacks out of their native land, but it wasn't until 1948 that apartheid became law. And apartheid is separateness, so they governed these people based off the color of their skin. So they couldn't go to the same schools, couldn't have the same jobs, couldn't live in certain areas. So in 1950, they proposed a series of laws that were called the group laws, and they put all the people into the places where they had to live, called their homelands. So they basically stripped them of their right to be South Africans, and they just became members at whatever their group was in their homeland. So these mass removals were very significant. They relocated about 9 million South Africans to various places, and this is where they had to work. And they had an ID card that told them what race they were and who they were allowed to be with and where they were allowed to be at certain times. So there was resistance to this time period, and one of the largest mass removals was from Johannesburg to Soweto. And in Soweto, about 10,000 students were marching to the soccer field just to protest, a peaceful protest, where they were just showing how unhappy they were, but the policemen fired upon them, killing a significant amount of people, including Hector Peterson, who was a student from the school. This photo here, so this is at the memorial for Hector Peterson, but this photo here was on international newspapers spread across the world. It kind of shocked everybody, and Hector Peterson became the face of all the youth who died in South Africa for getting rid of the apartheid. And then another one of the uprisings against it was in Sharpeville, where they were marching to get their passport ID. They weren't carrying their passport IDs, so they were just hoping to get arrested and show we're not okay with having to carry these IDs. But again, the policemen fired upon them and declared an emergency, where they sent a lot of the leaders to prison on Robben Island. One of these people was Nelson Mandela. So if you've heard anything about South Africa, you know Nelson Mandela. So these are pictures of Soweto down that we took. So these are the slums that the people are currently living in, and this is an outlook over Soweto. So again, this was a township where they took 10,000 people from Johannesburg and moved them here. Our tour guide told us that about 10 people live in one of these, and they don't have running water. You can see they had outhouses that the community shared. So the whole town wasn't like that. This was another location in Soweto, and this is looking out. I know it's sort of blurry, but overall you can see the poverty. Unemployment is very high. And this was at the Mandela House. This was just really cool. You can see it was just a square, and that's the greatest leader of South Africa, and that's where he lived. So then we took a ferry to Robben Island, which is about 8 miles from to Cape Town. So that's why we took this ferry. And so Robben Island is where they sent the prisoners of the apartheid. So this is on Robben Island, and you can see out here is Table Mountain, which we'll talk about later. So this is the view that the prisoners had from where they were. On this island, they spent time just cutting limestone into small pieces. So this was the entrance to Robben Island. Like as soon as you got to the island, freedom cannot be mangled. This was our tour guide. All the tour guides there were prisoners on Robben Island before it became its current museum. This was Nelson Mandela's prison cell where he spent 27 years of his imprisonment in here. This is a picture from one of the bulletin boards there of them, the prisoners lined up here, just chiseling rocks. And this was a picture down the hall. So this was like this cell here. These are the lime quarries where they worked. This pile of rocks really is a pile of rocks. And in 2005, they came back. Nelson Mandela and other prisoners came back and they placed a rock here, like signifying that they came back. And it's sort of just a monument now, even though it's just a pile of rocks. So by looking at this, it kind of signifies to the rest of the world, like we're free, this is no longer a prison, we're out of the apartheid. So in...
Can you go back?
This yeah.
That little cave there, so the prisoners that used to work in that, they called it their parliament. That's where they used to have their secret meetings. What they did is they used it as a toilet, and it stenched so badly that the guards would not go in there. And then because of that, they used it as a secret place to meet. And it's now called the Parliament, where they put together most of the uprising for after, which is really cool.
So then, as I said, Nelson Mandela was one of the great leaders in anti-apartheid movements, and he was there for 27 years. In 1989, they began removing the laws and letting the prisoners come back, basically because of international pressure. I mean, they couldn't trade with anybody who was black. They couldn't participate in the Olympics. They couldn't do anything. So unless they wanted to die off as a nation, they basically had to get rid of the apartheid. So in 90, he was released from prison. In 94, he was elected as the first black president of South Africa. And he died in 2013. And I believe the president now is another prisoner who was released from South Africa. So they're very much a coming country and have come a long way since, I guess, 1948. So
there was a significant amount of free time on the last day, so we sort of split off, and myself and Dr. Palé went to an ostrich farm. Ostriches in Africa in general are very big. This is a regular ostrich egg, and then the one on the right is an ostrich egg when the ostriches don't have enough calcium, so the eggs can't hatch. It's kind of wrinkled at the bottom. When across Africa, they used the ostrich eggs to, like villagers would use them to carry water. They would use them for art, for the feathers for clothing, pretty much anything that they could use ostriches for they did, because there's so many of them. This is their food on the farm. They feed them this, which is basically just little pellets that is comprised of this grass, and the ostriches eat their own eggs, which let them have the calcium that they need so that the next eggs can hatch, if that makes sense. So these pellets are comprised of both of those things, and then they also feed the ostriches little rocks so that their digestive systems can handle it. Ostrich eggs can withhold 250 pounds, so this is Dr. Palé standing on 2 ostrich eggs. This is the smallest ostrich in the world. They have like a world record holding, like this farm has for this ostrich. other ostriches won't come near it because it doesn't look like the other ones, so it's kind of by itself. And then we got to ride the ostriches. And then we also went to a penguin colony. This was part of the tour. And I think in 1990 there were 1.5 million African penguins in the continent. They're mostly located towards the southern part, but now I think there's like 20,000 penguins left. So they're very endangered. They're doing a lot to try and increase their population. There was you couldn't touch them, you couldn't go near them. We were sort of on like a boardwalk, and then they had different holds for the eggs when they lay them.
Part of their trip, we had the opportunity to see some natural occurring landmarks in Africa. So this one is Wide River Canyon. It's one of the largest canyons on Earth, and it spans 16 miles in length and is about 2,000 feet deep. It's known as one of the great wonders of nature in Africa. At the canyon, we also had the opportunity to shop at some of the at the markets that were along the street. So here's some of the pictures. Each of these markets had a lot of handmade items. A lot of them were made out of wood or just painted like tapestries or things like that. So we had an opportunity to buy a lot of souvenirs there. This is also another picture from the canyon just to show how beautiful this was. It was breathtaking to be standing up there and seeing this natural occurring landmark. So then this is Burke's luck potholes. He hoped to strike gold here, but unfortunately he didn't, but somebody else, they came and had luck there. And these are created just from centuries of water flowing through them. Again, these pictures don't do these justice at all, just because he's standing and seeing something like this, it was, I don't know how to explain it. It was And then on one of our last days in Cape Town, we had the opportunity to ride a cable car to the top of Table Mountain. So this mountain is very flat on the top, and it's over 3,000 feet high and overlooks the city of Cape Town. So that's just a picture from down below. And so this down here on the bottom is Cape Town from the top of the mountain, and then that's another picture of the mountain. These are little animals that live on the mountain. They're called Dassie, and they were just running around. They weren't scared of people or anything like that, so they were kind of interesting. And we rode a cable car to the top of this mountain. And as we were riding up, it spun around so you could see the whole city as you were riding up this cable. It's kind of scary if you're scared of heights, but
the next thing we got the opportunity to do was visit a local traditional Shingayan village, which was directly across from the safari lodge that we stayed at, and our tour guide actually lives in the village. This is a picture of the sign of their primary school and a picture of like the gate going into their school. Unfortunately, we weren't able to see their school since we went on a Sunday, but later on the tour we got to see some of the children and interact with them. These are some pictures of the houses that we saw. Some of them were still being built while some were more finished. And then this pictures are showing like some of the houses were looked like huts compared to like the other houses looked more like traditional houses in America, like brick and siding and stuff like that. That building is their local convenience store where they would get all of their groceries and necessities, and it was just one store, which was really interesting because in America we have so many different places we can go to get things, but they just have this one location to go to. This is the pictures of all the animals. A lot of the animals would just roam around the whole village while we were walking, just like walked right past us. We're very gentle. like and really interact with us, but it was cool just to see them walking around us. Like it was normal to them. It was so weird to us though. And then the bottom picture is showing like some of the local natives interacting with some of their animals. This was the most interesting thing to me. We got to visit their witch doctor, which before anyone could go to the hospital they have in their village, they have to visit the witch doctor first. And the top middle picture is a picture of where the witch doctor like does all her stuff. It's like a little hut. And when we walked in, she was sitting on the floor, and she didn't speak English, so our tour guide like explained to us what she was doing. And behind her, there's a picture on the other side. It shows like all the stuff she uses for her medicines. And she also, one of the more interesting ones that she told us about was the KFC bucket had elephant dung in it, and they would say if you sniff it, they would cure your headaches, which was really interesting. Like their philosophy.
Yeah.
We didn't smell it. We didn't.
They would burn it and then breathe the fumes.
The top picture on the other side is a picture of her certificate, what she had to go through to become a witch doctor, which it didn't seem very extensive, which was kind of surprising. It said like 5 days of training or something. And then the middle picture on the bottom.
You could have become one.
I'm not really sure what she did at the training. And then the bottom picture is she poured out this cup of had stones and bones and things like dice in it, and she used them to figure out like if someone feels sick or if someone doesn't know like what's wrong with them, she figures out what's wrong with them by like reading them and looking at them. So that was really interesting. Then the last thing, these are some pictures that like when we interacted with the children, they like walked up to us like so excited and wanted to hold our hands. It was really cool. And they like pretty much the second half of the tour just like walked with us, so it was really cool to interact with them. So it was nice since we didn't get to visit their school. Alright, one of the museums that we visited was the Origin Center. We got to see many different things along the human history in the Origin Center. One of the things that stood out to me is I was able to hold a skull of Lucy, like a big skull, but that's up here in the top corner. She was once believed to be the oldest specimen of the hominin species. They've since found older, but for the longest time she was that. She's the most well-known species. She was a 40% complete skeleton when recovered, and they also had different other skulls of hominin species found, but I showed a couple. As the human race developed, they had different tools that they used for hunting and gathering, and as they developed hunting skills, they developed a bow and arrow, and when they took on the hunt, they would dip the arrow into a poison that they made, and I can't remember all the components of it, but when they punctured the animal with the arrow, it would kill it with the poison that they had made. They also had a oldest piece of art that they had found. It's what they believed to be the primitive work. And then this is the group photo outside the Origin Center. They also showed that the DNA can be linked to each person has 99.9% shared DNA. And this is a map of like a picture that I took of how the origin of species spread from South Africa to the rest of the continents. We all, for 95% of the human history, we share like the hunting and gathering. And the differences between people is superficial. It's all inside our DNA is the same. And our genetic code shows that we are one person. We also were able to take an African safari, which is one of the biggest things that you would want to do when intending a trip to Africa. So I thought it was very interesting. Now this top picture is a picture of a sunrise. So we had to get up before sunrise and to get in the truck to drive to Kruger because we stayed outside of the Kruger National Forest and National Park. And so our first thing that we did, went in, was go through a series of gates. And so while we were waiting through the gates, the sunrise coming up was beautiful. And we were able to see giraffe and water buffalo and rhino and elephant. And the amount of zebra that we've seen was very significant, along with the impalas, which were the most numerous, which is up here. And then, of course, we were able to see the typical view of what you would see for an African safari, in distinct trees. It was very beautiful. This is the truck that we were able to ride in. It had different levels so that we could see out. It was a rainy day when we did go, so they gave us these little rain jackets that you can see us wearing to help keep us warm and protect us, because we spent almost the entire day out driving around through the safari. We were also, a rare thing to be able to do on African safari is see the Big Five, which the Big Five is the 5 most dangerous animals to hunt on foot, which are the lion, the rhino, which we were able to see leaving the park. We almost didn't get to see the Big Five. The water buffalo, the elephant, and then the leopard. In this tree here is actually where the leopard was located when we saw it. It's really hard to see, but its tail is hanging down here. It was very covered by the leaves and stuff of the tree. On our last day, we had a free day. And so as Sarah and Palé went to the Ostrich Farm, the rest of us went great white shark cage diving. So it was a phenomenal experience to be able to have. There was a marine biologist on board with us to answer any questions, and she was also filling us with facts about the great white. As we were able to see, I think we saw 7 of them. They would have a fake seal here on the left side that they had out, and then they had a bait that was out on the right to lure in the sharks and keep them close to the boat for us to see them while in this shark cage down here, which fit, I believe, 9 people in it. When you're in the cage, you come up for air and you hang on to the bar, and if you can't see the shark, they'll tell you down right, down left, and you can go underwater and look at the shark swimming. And they do not allow the shark to grab a hold of the bait or the decoy. They'll pull it in so that they can't get it, so that they keep lingering curiosity and trying to stay in so that you get more time to see them. Although they were able to get the bait, I think twice. They weren't quick enough. While we were on the shark boat, a whale boat came by and to investigate the sharks since they were out whale watching. And some of the information that they were able to give us about the sharks was the length. A mature female grows up to 20 feet in length. Males measure 11 to 13 feet, and immature females are about 15 to 16 feet. And the great white is able to accelerate over 35 miles per hour in short bursts, and which we were able to experience one of the shark's short bursts. When we were in the cage, admiring the beauty of the great white shark, it came full steam ahead and slammed into the cage right in front of myself and Dr. Abi Abdallah, which was very exhilarating.
When you are 6 inches away from shark teeth.
After it slammed into the cage, it kind of floated for about a couple seconds, regaining itself before it slowly swam off. But it was very exciting. And then the lifespan of a great white is approximately about 70 years. And they do recognize these sharks, and they have names for specific ones. And the one that I was able to identify the easiest was one that had a female that had the bottom part of its tail chopped off by They're speculating maybe a boat or something. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, so is that as deep as the cave was?
Yes, right there. It was attached to the side of the boat. So this is the top of the cage where you're able to keep your head above water and breathe. Because you're wearing a wetsuit and goggles and you have a weight on you that they put on you when you go in the water. And then you are able to go down underneath the water. It has bars that you can hang on to and keep yourself submerged underneath the water to be able to look at the sharks.
So how much of your body can you get under the water?
You can get your whole body under the water.
So it's under that, it's another 6 feet deep or something?
At least.
Oh, okay, I was wondering.
It's a pretty big cage.
Yeah, I would say total was maybe 8 to 9 feet, and then so you could keep your head above water to get air, and then they'll tell you which direction to look, go down and look, so you push yourself under, and you're fully submerged.
There were like horizontal bars that you could like put your feet under, so you could kind of like keep yourself under.
So you didn't have to hold on to the outside of the cage?
No, you were I just see one like that my hand was on right
The
there.
one that Beth's hand's on right here is one of the inside bars.
And they were like that, like I guess every couple feet.
Did you guys ever see Jaws?
Okay.
So you were, the penguins were referred to a little while ago as African penguins, but I've been there too. They're actually called jackass penguins, and that's because when they talk, they sound like donkeys, and it's just this bizarre thing to hear this donkey sound out of a little penguin. I mean, it's just like so bizarre. Anyways, and that's they named the penguins out of the sound for the sound they make.
Especially because they're on the beach and not like the typical Arctic look. So
Right.
It's like
Yeah. Well, that's interesting too, right? So yeah.
They are so lazy though. They just sit there doing nothing.
They're all sunning.
Yeah, I'm saddened by the demise of the penguins. What accounts for this enormous reduction? Diseases or predation, or I'm sure people don't shoot them.
No, I think just with people expanding, that they were
habitat destruction.
so that they were sort of
habitat
forced out of
encroaching.
where they wanted to be.
So how many are there now?
I think like between 20 and 30,000 compared to 1.5 million in like 1990, I think.
That's on the African continent. There are more on.
Right.
Yeah, but on the African continent itself, they've seen dramatic reduction.
So I was wondering what kind of a lodge you stayed in when you were by Kruger.
We stayed in a lodge. The main building had like a swimming pool and a fire pit and like a lodge that you could sit under the table and stuff. But where we actually slept was in little huts. So they had it was like a cement hut, like wall with a circle, and it had the roof that was like straw, and inside it had 2 beds. It had or 3 beds. They had 3 twin beds in ours, and a little bathroom and the floor is cement. It was very small, and you had a bug net that you slept with around you in this bed because of the risk of mosquitoes and stuff.
Yeah, so it was all outdoors.
Yeah.
So you had your own hut, and then it was just like a door key, and then for eating or everything else, that was all outside, but that was in a separate area.
And there were wild animals around those huts.
Yes.
The one night we ran into a couple zebras just outside the hut.
Yeah, did they have guards outside for you? Like were you told not to walk outside at night?
No.
They assured us that the leopards and the lions don't come in. Everything else was there, but the leopards and the lions stayed out.
Although on our bushwalk they told us that they did see a leopard right behind where we were staying.
Yeah, the first night that we stayed there was the tour guide that gave us a tour in the village gave us a tour behind the village, the lodge that we stayed in, and he identified a leopard print from the first night that we were there. So there was one.
It's amazing what they could tell. I mean, they can tell fingerprints of many different animals. They can tell you from the consistency and dryness of poop when the animal was there. It's just crazy.
And we also saw a whole skeleton of a giraffe too, which was really cool.
Oh, what?
A whole skeleton of a giraffe.
Oh, wow.
We brought a few bones back.
Yeah, the femur bone was like ginormous.
What's the temperament of an ostrich?
I thought they were aggressive, but
That's funny.
Well, we got to like feed them, so they're not that bad, but they don't have like teeth or anything. So, I mean, if you don't get your eyes close to them, then they can't really hurt you. When you would feed them the corn, they would like grab onto your hand, but it wasn't like too aggressive or anything. I think during like mating, they get more aggressive. But
Actually, some of them are mean.
They are.
That's
I
what
think
thought,
they just
yeah.
allowed them to be with the nice ones.
So the domesticated ones are not too bad, but the wild ones, you don't want to go near the wild ones. Especially the ones that have a pink beak. That's a male essentially in heat. So you don't want to come near that.
I spoke to a guy from India who raises them in Malaysia and has people riding them in a national park there just outside of Kuala Lumpur. And I asked him that, how do you decide, aren't these mean sometimes? And he said, the ones over there are the mean ones.
yeah, that's how ours was
Yeah.
too. They had bigger
Sit
pens,
right up
and
behind
then
the
the
neck.
further away pens were the ones that they hadn't
Yeah.
trained yet, I guess.
And he told me the ostrich I rode is nearsighted. I said, how do you know? He said, here, hold some grain. And when I did, it was trying to get the grain, but it couldn't quite get it. So you could tell its sight was off. Isn't that interesting?
One thing that maybe you can talk about, the tickets and entrance to the apartheid museum.
oh yeah. So the tickets they gave us kind of classified you as either white or non-white. So
Oh, really?
you would go through different doors, kind of as if you were in the apartheid. It was chronological, so it started at the beginning and then took you the whole way through the struggles and the uprisings, all the way to the release of Mandela and other anti-apartheid leaders. So it was very, very nice.
The thing about it, you don't expect it, right? We bought group tickets, right? So the machine spits out these tickets. Half are white, half are colored, and we're like, well, what do we do with these? So we kept going, right? And when you get to the entrance, we thought, oh, it's the Apartheid Museum. They're just, tickets, showing you whatever. But when you get to the entrance, there's two doors. And they take you to two different places at the beginning and two different treatments, and pretty much your first reaction is very visceral, like, well, what the hell? Right? And it just gets you thinking of what these people went through, right? That's
Right.
crazy.
And now there's like the coloreds, which are people from Cape Town that are in the past from Malaysia with white parents sort of cross, and then they have the blacks, which are just what we sort of consider like African Americans, and then they have whites, and all of those terms are non-offensive. So that was kind of interesting how they went from that segregation, those three different types, and then now everybody interacts and there's no offensive terminology.
Like they're proud of what they are, regardless of the separation.
But economically, the apartheid is still in.
Mm-hmm.
On the books, it isn't. Economically, socially, everything else, it is. You could not. It's there. And drivers, waiters, whatever, all workers were blacks, whites own businesses, and everything else. The economy of it is still there, even though it's not on the books anymore.
And one more. When you were in the national park, did you take malaria pills as precaution or not? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It was off season for mosquitoes, and there wasn't a whole lot of still water, so there hadn't been a whole lot of rain. So they said that you can take them if you want, but it wasn't necessary. Yeah.
Where we were, the risk of malaria was less than 5%, but we still took malaria pills. Well, we had to take a bunch of other vaccines as well before.
Typhoid and hepatitis.
You didn't go to any of the universities, did you? Like University of Cape Town or Stellenbosch or?
No, we did. We did.
We drove past it.
Okay.
The Origins Museum is in one of the universities in Johannesburg.
Oh, okay.
That's in the university.
Well, you know, there's been riots and sit-ins and demonstrations and vandalism and stuff going on for months at University of Cape Town and several other places.
When we were there, we didn't see any of that.
I've got a friend who teaches there. Believe me.
I believe.
School closed for weeks at a time and so on.
Yeah.
So basically, all the buildings there have the barbed wire and fences around them, so it's clearly there for a reason.
Which university are you talking about?
Well, not just in Cape Town, but all through South Africa.
Oh, right. Well, yeah. Although, yeah, maybe Cape Town's got barbed wire about it now, but when I was there, it didn't. So,
really?
You mean the university?
Yeah, the University of Cape Town.
Yeah.
But Cape Town's a different environment than Johannesburg is. There's a lot of barbed wire everywhere in Johannesburg.
Yeah.
In Cape Town, there's barbed wire hardly anywhere.
Right.
So
not when we were there. Almost every house in Cape Town, every fence.
Well, yes, houses, yes.
Yeah, houses, not the university.
Right, people have protection in their houses and they have bars on every window and so on.
Yeah.
So.
Definitely everything in Soweto is like that. Very bad.
I think we're way over time.
Yeah.